Hello and welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm your host, Christine Niles. Thousands of people have left the transgender lifestyle. They've detransitioned. But why is it that we never hear their voices, or hardly ever at all? Well, that's because they're being silenced by big media and big tech. People don't want the public to know that they exist, but they do. And they have important experiences and stories to share with the rest of us that we need to hear. One of these voices that refuses to be silenced is David Arthur Kendall. Here he is recently at a school board meeting in Manchester School District talking about what he calls the LGBT cult.
I was a transgender woman for over 20 years. I was an advocate and a member of this movement for over 30 years. The LGBTQIA trans queer rainbow cult does not represent gay men or women. This movement represents perversion. I suffered from gender dysphoria. Dysphoria means an abnormal condition of mental confusion. When a child is targeted, groomed, and sexualized, there's something in that child's mind that gets tainted, and it creates thoughts and feelings that can be dangerous.
So I am honored to welcome onto my show that man, David Arthur Kendall. David, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
It's an honor. Thank you for having me. So
you have a very, very interesting story that I think my viewers really need to hear. I want to go back to the very beginning because that seems to be where all of this started. Before you got into the whole, as you call it, the LGBT cult, you were sexually abused as a child, right?
Yes, several times.
And was this by a family member, a friend, a stranger? How did that happen?
This was by family friends, as well as neighbors and other adults in my life, like in the school system, and parents of friends that I was, the adults I was supposed to be able to trust and confide in. It's the same adults that right now the schools, the public government school systems are fighting to make children be responsible to. These same adults. These are the same adults that targeted me and preyed on me.
That's just tragic. And how young were you when it started?
About 6 years old.
Okay. And so what effects did that have on you as a child?
Well, it sexualized me, and I like to say that it woke something up in me that should have never been woke up, right? It woke up something in my mind and in my body. It created a desire within me, and it sexualized me, and eventually down the road, I would be craving it. I actually mistaken, I must re-say that. Actually, I was associating love and affirmation with sex. So there came a point in my life when I was 10 years old and I was cutting school and hanging out in public bathrooms or at bus stops looking for someone to love me and to show me that attention. My father took his life just before I was born. So
oh, wow.
I was not as, I didn't have that male affirmation in my childhood.
Sure. Wow. So 10 is very, very young to be doing that. And so strangers would just come up to you and then engage in sex with you?
Yes, I would actually go to the areas we lived in southern New Jersey, Atlantic City area, and I would go to the areas where the LGBTQIA plus cult, as I call it, was prominent in their neighborhoods and near their bars or their clubs around their strips. And those would be the men that targeted.
Wow. So you get into this LGBT lifestyle. How did you then get into the whole transgender lifestyle?
As a child, I started looking at the women in my life, and there were a lot of them. And I noticed that they were getting the male affirmation that I really desired. The the more public displays of affection. And I wasn't getting that. And so I figured I must be a girl trapped in a boy's body. And, I didn't have any contact with trans. There was no trans queer studies for me in school. There was none of that presented to me. This was something that came about myself. And I kind of now associate it with what I call internalized homophobia. The fact that I recognized I was same-sex attracted at such a young age, but I also recognized that in culture and society there was this stigma over being same-sex attracted, and I didn't want to be that one that was poked and beat up and made fun of and called names. And so through the trauma, I dissociated from myself, and I just took on a whole new identity, which is what we see happening throughout the world right now.
Right. And how old were you when you started doing this?
Probably about 9 or 10, around 8, between 8 and 10, I started believing that I was a girl trapped in a boy's body, that God had made a mistake. I talked to God twice in my youth, and the first time was before I went to bed. I prayed, can I wake up tomorrow morning and be a girl? And when I didn't wake up and be a girl the next morning, I shook my fist up in the sky and said, how could you do this to me? Why did you make a mistake? And that
Right.
was it,
Right.
and then I just kind of moved on. And the further along that I got into it, I was very distraught. I didn't have a childhood. I was a very distraught child. My mom was at her wit's end with me. Having that my father had taken his life just before I was born, and I didn't know throughout my childhood that my mother felt responsible for that. So when I wanted to get my way, or when I didn't get my way, I would threaten to kill myself, and then I would get my way. So I turned into a manipulative little person. We like to think of children as they're innocent, but you don't have to teach a child how to lie or to sneak or to manipulate. We're all born into sin, shaped in iniquity. Iniquity at its root means perversion. And so for me, I was wanting so badly not to be who and what I was. And I just thought that the further I went, that I would eventually obtain or attain the peace and the joy and the happiness that I was seeking. And 13 years old, I overdosed on pills for the first time. 14 years old, I ran away from home, and I lived on the streets of Philadelphia. And, and it was all downhill from there.
Mm-hmm. And so talk about your experiences, because eventually you became a prostitute, right? A transgender prostitute. Can you talk
At
about
14,
your experiences?
When I ran away from home, I immediately, so what happened was, after I overdosed on pills at 13, my mother was completely at her wit's end. She didn't know what to do. She wanted to rescue me. She took me away from South Jersey and to a family friend in Philadelphia, the only option. And she told me, she said, listen, I had a son. I didn't have a daughter. Your name is David. You cannot be Paige. You cannot be none of these girls' names that you're adopting for yourself. You can't do that under this roof. And that's when I ran away at 14. I lived on the streets of Philadelphia. I did become a prostitute. I also started using drugs a lot more, and alcohol. I was going to the nightclubs at 14 years old. I was also buying female hormones, wrong sex hormones, on the streets and in the nightclub. And taking them while I was prostituting. I became a sex addict. So if I was not selling my body or trading it for drugs or alcohol, I was giving it away. And I really just wanted to find that peace, that joy, that happiness, that one person that would love me. And it just never worked out. And so all throughout those years, and I could go on and on and on and on through for the 20 years following age 14, but it was all the same thing. It was like a routine, and it was traveling and going and getting this done and taking these wrong sex hormones. And by the age of 15, my mental deterioration from the hormones was it was out of control. I was like on an emotional roller coaster. gosh. I was in and out of jail, of course, prostitution, juvenile hall, jail as an adult as well, drugs, alcohol.
One of the things that you mentioned, because I've been looking at the things that you've put online, and you did mention that you came across a lot of powerful people, like politicians and judges and things like that, who were actually, paying you for your services as a transgender prostitute.
Yes, and one of the most important parts about that is that we wonder right now in today's age, we wonder, how did we get here, right? How did we get here legally and morally? How are there so many legal protections for these things that we know are just morally wrong? They're perversions. Some of them are just so disgusting that we're like, how did we get this on television? How did we get this walking down? How are we protecting this? And so when you think about that, you have to start thinking on terms of, there are a lot of things out there that society doesn't know or understand. So under this trans umbrella that we have falls some things called AGP, or better known as autogynephiles, which are fetishists, cross-dressers, transvestites. They are men who are sexually aroused by either the thought of themselves as a woman or wearing women's clothing. Now, these men are not homosexual men. They are not gender dysphoric. They are their mental disorder is a whole nother thing. It's a paraphilia. It's a sexual deviance. And so these men were the men that I had as clients, and they were judges, and they were lawyers, and they were police chiefs, and politicians, and CEOs, and they would come to my hotel room or to my apartment, and when they would remove their three-piece suit, they would have on garter belts or women's panties or a bra or something like that. So these are the men that are responsible for our laws, right? For passing laws for our protections. These are the men that are responsible for that. And so I had a very good friendship with Dr. Judith Reisman before she had passed away, for about the 2 years before she passed away.
Very heroic woman, very courageous
yes,
woman.
she was. She was amazing. And she was dear to my heart. And she said something to me one day. She said, David, she said, men that are enveloped in immorality are way less likely to stand up against immorality, even when they know it's wrong. And then we started looking at the pornography, how it's overtaken everything. Everyone is enveloped in some type of pornography, and that's immorality. And so these men that are enveloped in pornography and these fetishes and these paraphilias are way less likely to stand up against the immorality of the LGBTQIA trans queer gender cult, because they are enveloped in immorality themselves. And so that's like really how we got here to where we are, right? It is because most of these politicians, and some of them, they're pretty bold about it. I mean, like we see in California, what's going on there with their politicians, right? I mean, they are pretty bold about it. They don't care if anyone knows that they are perverted or immoral. But these are the men that are responsible for the situation that we find ourselves in today. It's not punishment. It's not anyone, any specific person. It is a complete array of perversion that has affected so many different people in so many different ways, because there is no cookie cutter example when you're talking about this trans queer gender cult. There is no cookie cutter example, because there are men. I mean, we see from the YouTube show Mr. Beast or something like that, how he just went from manly man, rugged man, father to transgender, and that's not gender dysphoria. that is a fetish, and that is a paraphilia, and that is more of a sexual deviance than a dysphoric disorder. You know, so it's all of these different things, and we're so enveloped in them, and we're so caught up in our thoughts and our feelings, right, and our doctrines and our beliefs, that we cannot come together and stand together and lock arms to come up against this dark movement that is trying desperately to envelop not just our nation, but our children. This is, the children have been targeted and preyed on and devoured for thousands of years. It's always been about the children. And if they don't get them in the womb, then they're going to get them in the public government school system. And they're going to get them in society and in culture and in theater and wherever else they gather. That's where they're going to get them.
I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Real Estate for Life. Are you looking to buy or sell a home? Maybe you want to move to a more family-friendly place? Real Estate for Life can help you with that. I myself have used them twice, once to sell a home, another time to buy a home. In both cases, they paired me with a professional who shared my values, plus he gave a cut of his commission to a pro-life charity of my choice. Real Estate for Life is a multinational company that connects pro-life home seekers with realtors and professionals who share their values. When you buy or sell a home with Real Estate for Life, the agent will give a share of his commission to the charity that you have chosen. So for instance, on a house worth $180,000, approximately $1,000 of that will go to the pro-life charity of your choice. And that's all without costing you a penny. It really is a win-win. So to connect with a pro-life realtor, please go to realestateforlife.org. That's realestateforlife.org. Now, as far as your encounters with these politicians and judges and CEOs and all these, I mean, would you say that there were a minority, a fairly sizable minority of people that you came across?
No, these were the most, okay, so, I mean, I had a lot of clientele when I was a prostitute, and some of them were very cheap. Some of them paid a lot. These were the men that paid a lot of money to be one of the girls for an hour or two. Some of them were very violent, and they were into some very dark practices, sadomasochism, bondage, discipline, that kind of thing. Some of them petrified me. A few times I didn't think I was going to make it out of the hotel room. So, these are the things that envelop people and eventually just cause them to downward spiral into the abyss, ultimately, because it always starts out with something like soft porn and then hard porn, and then it just goes downhill from there, and it gets worse and worse. And fetishes, the same thing, get worse and worse. We have children in schools that are identifying as furries, and it breaks my heart because I try to explain to people, furries started off as one of the darkest sexual erotic fetishes that there was, and it had to do with child sacrifice. It had to do with snuff films. We're talking about bestiality. Furries goes down so many dark rabbit holes that it's scary to think that anybody would condone or promote or encourage this in a child. But we're seeing the same fetishes advertised on social media, at these prideful parades and marches of lust and debauchery. We see this advertised. We see them marching down the street. We see them crawling on all fours, and we call it progress. And it's progressive, but it's definitely not progress. It is it's just something that's going to take us and take the children,
right,
very dark places.
You have some photos of yourself from your former life as a transgender, and you look very happy and all of that. But, you've spoken about the fact that you were actually very miserable and that a lot of people in that lifestyle now are just putting on a facade. Could you talk about that?
Yes, everyone that knew me would have said that I was happy, I was content, I was secure, I was just being my true self. I was just being the girl I was meant to be. And they had no idea that I was miserable. I was broken, I was confused, I was so unhappy, I was depressed, I was very suicidal. I tried to take my life more than a few times. I thought about it more than that. And at the same time, I don't know if I really wanted to end my life or if I just wanted someone to hear my cry, right? My scream, like my call for help. And
Right.
and that's what we have now. That's what we have. That's what we're seeing now. I just spoke at a school board meeting last night, and there was a transgender child there. And one of the things I always bring up is I was the transgender kid. I was the trans kid that's always exploited in the discussions and these debates of why this trans queer affirmation is needed. But I was also a suicidal trans adult, because transition and acceptance and affirmation doesn't remove depression and suicidal tendencies and angst and confusion and heartbreak and misery and self-hatred. It doesn't remove that. And one thing that a lot of people has said about my pictures, I show my pictures a lot, and I always say I don't show them to boast or brag, but I show them to show and prove that there's no such thing as too far gone. And when I show them, a lot of people come back to me and they say, wow, your eyes then and your eyes now, two different people. Like your eyes were dead, they were dark, and your eyes now are full of life and they have a spark to them. And I mean, that's what God Almighty, right? That's what our Father in heaven does for us.
Right.
He gives us a purpose, and he touches us, and he gives us, he rises us up for this right here, for such a time as this. And
yeah. And could you talk about how you eventually got out of that lifestyle?
yes. So I remember I was about a week or two away from getting castrated, which was the first step then to the entire operation. But from castration in New York City, I was going to go to Mexico and get some super large implants in my chest. And then from there, I was going to go to Thailand and have the final surgery. What they called then sexual reassignment surgery. Now they call it gender affirming surgery. And I was on a beach with two transgenders they were both post-op. They had the operation already. And we were sitting on a blanket on Coney Island, New York City, and we were having a good old time. And they just both looked at me and said, "Don't do it." And I said, "Don't do what?" And the one looked at me and he said to me, he says, all of my life, he said, I thought I could find peace and joy and happiness if I could just be a girl. He said, and now I am medically and legally a girl. And I'm more miserable now than I ever was my entire life. He said, and I think about taking my life every day. The other one looked at me and he said, I think about taking my life several times a day, every day. You do not want to be us. Don't do it. And then it's like we were out of that bubble and we were back to having a good old time and laughing and talking.
I hope you're enjoying the show. The rest of the show is behind the paywall, so please go to churchmilitant.com to watch the rest. For those who are not premium subscribers, you can sign up at churchmilitant.com/go premium. See you there.